Standing in the executive boardroom of Horizon Entertainment Group, watching my husband's face drain of all color as I signed the termination papers for his employment, I couldn't help but smile. 3 months earlier, he had abandoned me in the middle of Sunset Gardens, our flagship theme park, claiming his phone died and he forgot I was there. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. What he didn't know was that I wasn't just another visitor that day. I was the owner of every single ride, restaurant, and gift shop he walked past while leaving me behind. The morning of July 15th started like any other Saturday in our suburban Sacramento home. Marcus was already dressed in his usual weekend attire, khaki shorts and a polo shirt, scrolling through his phone at the breakfast table while I prepared fresh fruit and coffee. We had been married for 4 years, and these quiet weekend mornings had become our routine. I cherished them, believing they represented the peaceful foundation of our marriage. "Ready for our adventure today?" I asked, setting down his coffee mug, the one with "World's Best Husband" printed in cheerful blue letters that I had bought him for our second anniversary. Marcus barely looked up from his screen, offering only a distracted grunt in response. I attributed his preoccupation to work stress. As a mid-level marketing coordinator for a regional advertising firm, he often brought his professional anxieties home with him. The drive to Sunset Gardens Entertainment Resort took nearly 2 hours from our neighborhood, winding through California's Central Valley before reaching the sprawling complex that had been a cornerstone of family entertainment for over 6 decades. As we approached the towering entrance gates, adorned with whimsical sculptures and vibrant flowers, I felt the familiar flutter of excitement mixed with something deeper, something I had never shared with Marcus. "I still can't believe you've never been here before," I said, watching his expression as he took in the magnificent sight. The park stretched as far as the eye could see, with roller coasters reaching toward the sky and the distinctive spires of Enchanted Castle gleaming in the morning sun. "My family used to come here every summer when I was growing up. It holds so many memories for me." Marcus parked in the visitor lot, Section C, Row 12. I made note of the location, as I always did, though something told me this visit would be different from our usual outings. We had planned this trip for weeks, ever since I suggested we needed more fun in our lives, more shared experiences that weren't centered around his career ambitions or social obligations. Walking through the main entrance, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Sunset Gardens had been more than just a childhood destination for me. It was legacy, history, and responsibility all wrapped up in a place that brought joy to millions of visitors each year. The weight of that knowledge pressed against my chest as we passed underneath the famous archway, where generations of families had posed for photographs. "Let's start with the Thunderbolt Express," Marcus suggested, pointing toward the massive steel roller coaster that dominated the skyline in the thrill-seeker section of the park. "I want to get the intense rides done first before the lines get too long." His enthusiasm seemed genuine, and I felt hopeful that we might recapture some of the playful energy that had characterized our early relationship. As we made our way through the themed pathways, past the Victorian-era storefronts of Main Street Village, and into the more adventurous sections of the park, I found myself studying Marcus more carefully than usual. He seemed distracted, frequently checking his phone despite my gentle reminders that we had agreed to disconnect for the day and focus on each other. "Who keeps texting you?" I asked after his phone buzzed for the 4th time in 10 minutes. We were standing in line for the Thunderbolt Express, surrounded by excited families and couples holding hands. The contrast between their obvious joy and Marcus's divided attention struck me as particularly stark. "Just work stuff," he replied, quickly shoving the device back into his pocket. "You know how demanding the Peterson account has been lately. Sometimes clients expect immediate responses even on weekends." His explanation sounded reasonable, but something in his tone made me uneasy. Marcus had always been ambitious, sometimes ruthlessly so, but he had never been dismissive of our time together in quite this way. The Thunderbolt Express lived up to its reputation, sending us careening through loops and drops at speeds that left my heart racing and my hair completely disheveled. For a few minutes, Marcus seemed present and engaged, laughing at my screams and holding my hand during the most intense moments. When we stumbled off the platform, dizzy and exhilarated, I thought perhaps my concerns had been unfounded. "That was incredible," I gasped, leaning against the safety railing while my equilibrium returned. "I haven't felt that rush in years. What should we try next?" Marcus was already pulling out his phone again, his attention immediately captured by whatever appeared on the screen. The moment of connection we had shared on the ride evaporated as quickly as it had emerged. "Actually," he said, still staring at his device, "something urgent just came up. I need to make a few quick calls." He looked around the immediate area, as if searching for a quiet spot. "Why don't you grab us some lunch while I handle this? I saw a pizza place back near the carousel that looked decent." I felt a familiar pang of disappointment, the same feeling I had experienced countless times when Marcus prioritized his professional obligations over our personal time together. "Can it wait just a few hours?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light and understanding. "We've been planning this day for weeks, and we so rarely get uninterrupted time together anymore." Marcus's expression shifted, becoming slightly impatient in a way that made me feel like I was being unreasonable for wanting his attention. "Rachel, you know how important my career is to our future. This Peterson deal could be huge for the agency, which means it could be huge for us. I just need 30 minutes, maybe an hour at most, to sort this out." Against my better judgment, I agreed. Marcus kissed my cheek quickly and walked toward the quieter section of the park near the children's area, phone already pressed to his ear. I made my way to Piccolo's Pizza Palace, a charming Italian-themed restaurant with red-checkered tablecloths and murals of the Tuscan countryside covering the walls. While waiting for our order, I found myself people-watching, something I had always enjoyed doing in public spaces. Families shared meals and created memories. Couples fed each other bites of funnel cake. Teenagers laughed over shared jokes. Everyone seemed so connected, so present with their companions. The contrast with my own situation felt increasingly stark. An hour passed, then 2 hours. I called Marcus's phone repeatedly, each call going straight to voicemail. I sent text messages asking where he was, if he was okay, when he might return. No responses. The pizza grew cold on the table as I waited, making excuses to the servers, who kept asking if I needed anything else. As the afternoon stretched on, my concern transformed into something harder and more painful. This wasn't just poor time management or work-related distraction. This felt deliberate, almost cruel. I began walking through the park, searching for him in areas where he might have gone to make his calls. The customer service desk, the quiet gardens behind Enchanted Castle, even the men's restrooms near the main entrance. By 4 o'clock, I was forced to confront the devastating reality that Marcus had left the park entirely. I called his phone, one final time, and this time it rang through to his regular voicemail greeting. When I tried calling our home number, he answered on the second ring. "Oh, hey, Rachel," he said, his tone casual and unconcerned. "How's the park going? Are you having fun?" The casualness of his question, as if abandoning me at a theme park was perfectly normal behavior, left me momentarily speechless. "Marcus, where are you?" I managed to ask, my voice trembling with disbelief. "I've been looking for you for hours. I thought something terrible had happened." There was a pause, and I could hear the television in the background, the familiar sound of a baseball game he often watched on weekend afternoons. Oh, right. About that. The Peterson crisis turned out to be bigger than I thought. I had to come home to access my computer and handle everything properly. I figured you'd be fine entertaining yourself for the rest of the day. You love that place anyway. The dismissal in his voice, the complete lack of concern for my feelings or our ruined plans, hit me like a physical blow. You left me here. Without telling me? Without even checking if I had a way to get home? My voice was rising despite my attempts to stay calm. Other visitors were beginning to glance in my direction. Rachel, don't be dramatic. You're a capable adult. I'm sure you can figure out how to get home. Take an Uber or call your sister. It's not like you're stranded on a desert island. The line went dead before I could respond. I stood there in the middle of the park, surrounded by the sounds of joy and laughter, holding my phone and trying to process what had just happened. My husband had abandoned me at a theme park, driven home in our shared vehicle, and treated my distress as an inconvenience to his weekend plans. The humiliation burned in my chest, competing with a growing anger that felt foreign and powerful. The practical matter of getting home seemed almost secondary to the emotional impact of his betrayal. I could indeed call my sister Lauren, who lived about 40 minutes away and would drop everything to help me. I could order a rideshare service, though the distance would make it expensive. But the logistics weren't really the point. The point was that my husband had revealed something fundamental about how he viewed me, our marriage, and my worth as a person. As I walked toward the park exit to arrange my transportation home, I passed the executive offices building, an elegant structure tucked discreetly behind the main visitor areas. Most guests never noticed it, but I had spent countless childhood hours in those offices, sitting in board meetings with my grandfather, William Hayes, learning about the business of bringing happiness to families around the world. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. Marcus had abandoned me at a place where I could have solved any problem with a single phone call, where I had more authority than he could possibly imagine. But I had never told him about my connection to Horizon Entertainment Group, never revealed that the woman he had just treated so callously was the sole heir to a multi-billion-dollar entertainment empire. My grandfather had built Sunset Gardens from nothing in the 1960s, expanding it over the decades into a network of theme parks, resorts, and entertainment properties across the western United States. When he passed away 5 years ago, control of the company had transferred to a trust in my name, managed discreetly by a board of directors who had known me since childhood. I received quarterly reports and attended annual meetings, but I had chosen to live quietly, without the spotlight that often accompanied great wealth. Marcus knew I came from a comfortable background. He knew my family had money and that I didn't. Work outside the home because I didn't need to financially. But he had always assumed my father was successful in real estate or investments, something respectable but not extraordinary. I had never corrected his assumptions, preferring to be loved for who I was rather than what I owned. Now, standing at the gates of the empire I had inherited, abandoned by the man I had trusted with my heart, I began to question whether my desire for a normal marriage had been naive. Marcus had shown me who he really was today, and it wasn't someone who deserved my protection or my secrets. I called Lauren, who answered immediately with her usual warmth. "Rachel, how's your fun day at the park? Did Marcus finally learn to appreciate the magic of roller coasters?" Her cheerful voice made the contrast with my actual situation even more painful. "Lauren, I need you to come pick me up," I said, my voice carefully controlled to avoid breaking down completely. "Something has happened and I need to get home." The concern in her voice was immediate and genuine. "Of course, sweetheart. Are you hurt? Is Marcus okay? I can be there in 45 minutes. The difference between her instant care and Marcus's callous dismissal couldn't have been more stark. While I waited for Lauren in the visitor parking lot, sitting on a bench near the entrance where families continued to stream in and out, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to pretend this incident was acceptable. I wasn't going to make excuses for Marcus's behavior or convince myself that his work truly was more important than our relationship. For 4 years, I had been diminishing myself, making my world smaller to accommodate his ambitions and his ego. I had supported his career goals, managed our household, and asked for very little in return except basic respect and consideration. Today had shown me that even those minimal expectations were too much for him to meet. Lauren arrived exactly when she promised, her face creased with worry as she pulled up in her blue sedan. She took one look at my expression and immediately wrapped me in a hug without asking questions. "Let's get you home," she said simply. "You can tell me everything when you're ready." As we drove away from Sunset Gardens, I watched the towers and spires shrink in the rearview mirror. The park had been witness to one of the most humiliating experiences of my marriage, but it had also been the catalyst for a clarity I hadn't possessed that morning. I understood now that I had been living someone else's version of my life, someone smaller and less powerful than who I actually was. The woman who had arrived at the park that morning, eager to share a magical day with her husband, was gone. In her place sat someone who was beginning to remember what it felt like to have control, to have options, to have the power to determine her own fate. Marcus had no idea what he had awakened when he decided to leave me stranded among the rides and attractions that bore my family's name. By the time we pulled into my driveway, where Marcus's car sat in its usual spot as if nothing unusual had happened, I had begun to formulate a plan. It would take time and careful consideration, but I was going to show my husband exactly who he had chosen to abandon. The revelation would be devastating for him, but perfect for me. The woman he had left behind at the theme park was about to disappear forever, replaced by someone he had never truly known and definitely couldn't control. The transformation would begin immediately, and by the time it was complete, Marcus would understand exactly how much power he had thrown away for the sake of a client call that could have waited. As I walked through the front door of our home, where Marcus sat on the couch watching television as if nothing significant had occurred, I felt something shift inside me. The naive wife who had made excuses for his behavior was gone. In her place stood the granddaughter of William Hayes, the heir to an entertainment empire, and a woman who was done accepting less than she deserved. The game was about to change, and Marcus had no idea what was coming. The silence in our living room felt suffocating as I stood in the doorway, watching Marcus sprawled on the couch with a beer in his hand and his feet propped up on the coffee table. The baseball game flickered across the television screen, and he glanced up at me with the same casual indifference he might show a neighbor who had stopped by to borrow sugar. "You made it home," he said, taking a long sip from his bottle. "See? I told you it wouldn't be that big of a deal. How was the rest of your day at the park?" His tone suggested he genuinely believed abandoning me had been a minor inconvenience rather than a profound betrayal. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I studied this man I had shared a bed with for 4 years, searching for any sign of remorse or recognition of what he had done. His hair was slightly mussed from lying on the couch, and he wore the same clothes he had put on that morning for our planned adventure together. Nothing about his demeanor suggested he understood the magnitude of his actions. "Lauren had to drive almost an hour out of her way to come get me," I said finally, my voice carefully controlled. "I waited for you for over 4 hours, Marcus. 4 hours. I called and texted repeatedly, thinking something terrible might have happened to you." He muted the television and shifted slightly to face me, but his expression remained frustratingly neutral. "Look, I'm sorry it took longer than I expected. The Peterson situation really was urgent. But you're home now, safe and sound, so no harm done, right?" The dismissive way he waved his hand made my chest tighten with anger. "No harm done?" I repeated, disbelief creeping into my voice. "Marcus, we planned this day together. It was supposed to be about us spending quality time as a couple. Instead, you disappeared without explanation and left me stranded 90 miles from home." Marcus set down his beer and finally gave me his full attention, though his expression suggested he found my emotional response tedious. "Rachel, you're being overly dramatic about this. Yes, I had to leave unexpectedly for work, Yes, it was inconvenient for you, but you're acting like I committed some unforgivable sin. Successful people sometimes have to make sacrifices for their careers. I thought you understood that about me." The casual cruelty of his words hit me like ice water. This wasn't just thoughtlessness or poor time management. This was a fundamental lack of respect for me as a person and as his wife. "Sacrifices?" I echoed. I wasn't aware that treating your spouse with basic courtesy was considered a sacrifice. Marcus rolled his eyes, a gesture that made me feel simultaneously invisible and foolish. "Don't be melodramatic. We can go back to the park another time." "It's not like the rides are going anywhere." He reached for the remote to unmute the television, clearly considering the conversation finished. Something crystallized in that moment, watching him dismiss my feelings as easily as he might swat away an annoying insect. The man I had married was not who I thought he was, and perhaps more importantly, I was not who I had been pretending to be. The realization settled over me with surprising calm. "I'm going to stay at Lauren's tonight," I announced. "I need some space to think about what happened today and what it means for our marriage." Marcus looked genuinely surprised for the first time since I had arrived home. "What it means for our marriage? Rachel, you're really going to make this into some huge relationship crisis over one afternoon?" His incredulous tone suggested he found my reaction completely unreasonable. I walked upstairs to pack an overnight bag, each step feeling lighter than the last. As I folded clothes and gathered toiletries, I could hear Marcus moving around downstairs, the refrigerator opening and closing, the television volume increasing. He wasn't following me upstairs to apologize or to try to understand my perspective. He was settling in for an evening of relaxation, unburdened by concern for his wife's emotional state. 20 minutes later, I descended the stairs with my small suitcase, car keys in hand. Marcus looked up from the couch where he had resumed his previous position. "You're really leaving?" he asked, though his tone suggested mild annoyance rather than genuine distress. "I told you I was," I replied. "I'll call you tomorrow when I've had time to process everything that happened today." I paused at the front door, giving him one final opportunity to acknowledge the seriousness of the situation or to show some glimmer of remorse. Instead, Marcus shrugged and turned back to the television. "Fine. Maybe some time apart will help you get some perspective on how you're overreacting." The dismissal in his voice was so complete that I felt something inside me finally break free. The drive to Lauren's house took 30 minutes through quiet suburban streets lined with mature oak trees and well-maintained lawns. Each mile felt like additional distance from the woman I had been that morning, the woman who made excuses for her husband's thoughtlessness and convinced herself that his career ambitions justified his emotional neglect. Lauren lived in a charming bungalow in an older neighborhood near downtown Sacramento, where she had created a warm and welcoming home filled with books, plants, and artwork from local artists. When I pulled into her driveway, she was already waiting on the front porch, having changed from the clothes she wore to rescue me into comfortable jeans and a soft sweater. "I made tea," she said simply, embracing me as I climbed the porch steps. "And I ordered dinner from that Thai place you like. We don't have to talk about anything until you're ready." Lauren's guest bedroom was decorated in calming blues and whites, with a comfortable reading chair by the window and fresh flowers on the nightstand. As I unpacked my overnight bag, I found myself moving slowly, deliberately, as if I were performing an important ritual. Each item I placed in the drawer felt like a small declaration of independence. When I joined Lauren in her cozy kitchen, she handed me a mug of chamomile tea and settled across from me at her small dining table. "Whenever you want to tell me what really happened today, I'm here to listen," she said gently. "But there's no pressure. We can just eat pad thai and watch terrible romantic comedies if that's what you need." The kindness in her voice, so different from Marcus's cold dismissal, made my throat tighten with emotion. "He left me at the park, Lauren. Just disappeared without saying goodbye or telling me where he was going. When I finally reached him hours later, He acted like it was perfectly normal behavior. Lauren's expression darkened as I recounted the events of the day, from Marcus's distracted morning behavior to his casual dismissal of my feelings when I confronted him at home. She listened without interrupting, her face growing more concerned with each detail. "Rachel," she said finally, "that's not thoughtless behavior. That's deliberately cruel. No one who cares about you would abandon you like that, regardless of what work emergency came up." Her validation of my feelings brought immediate relief, confirming that I wasn't overreacting or being too sensitive. I keep trying to understand how someone I've lived with for 4 years could treat me so callously, I admitted. It's like he became a completely different person today. Or maybe he revealed who he's been all along and I just wasn't paying attention. Lauren reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Sometimes people show us who they really are in moments of stress, or when they think they can get away with poor behavior. The question is what you're going to do with this information now that you have it." That night, lying in Lauren's guest bed and staring at the ceiling, I found myself thinking not about Marcus or our troubled marriage, but about my grandfather. William Hayes had been a man of enormous integrity and strength, someone who built an empire by treating people with respect and kindness. He had taught me that real power came not from controlling others, but from knowing your own worth and refusing to accept less than you deserved. "Never let anyone make you smaller than you are, Rachel," he had told me during one of our last conversations before his death. "You carry the Hayes name and everything it represents. That's not just wealth or business success. It's a responsibility to stand up for what's right, especially when it's difficult." I had been making myself smaller for years, accommodating Marcus's moods and priorities while suppressing my own needs and desires. The woman who had built a successful art therapy practice before marriage had gradually disappeared, replaced by someone whose primary identity was as Marcus's wife and supporter of his ambitions. The next morning, Lauren and I sat on her back, patio drinking coffee and watching birds visit the feeders she had hung throughout her garden. The peaceful setting made it easier to think clearly about my situation and what steps I needed to take next. "I want to ask you something," Lauren said carefully. "And you don't have to answer if you're not ready. But are you planning to go back to him after this? Because if you are, I think you need to be prepared for the possibility that nothing will change." The question forced me to confront a truth I had been avoiding. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me keeps thinking this was just a terrible mistake, that if I explain clearly enough how much he hurt me, he'll understand and apologize, and we can move forward. But another part of me wonders if this is just who he is, and I've been making excuses for him for so long that I stopped seeing it clearly." Lauren nodded thoughtfully. "What would it look like if you stopped making excuses? What would you want your life to be if you could design it without considering his feelings, or his career, or his opinion of your choices?" The question opened something inside me that had been closed for so long I had forgotten it existed. "I would go back to my art therapy work," I said slowly. "I loved helping people process trauma and emotion through creative expression. I was good at it, and it felt meaningful in a way that managing our household never has." "What else?" Lauren prompted gently. "I would travel more. Marcus always said international trips were too expensive or too complicated with his work schedule, but I've always wanted to see more of the world. And I would reconnect with old friends who I've lost touch with because he didn't enjoy their company." The words came faster now, as if a dam had burst. I would stop apologizing for having opinions that differ from his. I would stop pretending to be interested in his work when he's never shown any genuine curiosity about mine. "Those all sound like things you could do regardless of whether you stay married," Lauren observed. "The question is whether Marcus would support those changes or resist them." I already knew the answer to that question. Marcus liked the version of me that centered his needs and didn't challenge his assumption that his priorities should always take precedence. The prospect of living authentically, of reclaiming the parts of myself I had sacrificed for the sake of our marriage, felt both exhilarating and terrifying. That afternoon, I drove to a quiet park near Lauren's house and called Rosa Martinez, the longtime employee relations manager at Sunset Gardens. Rosa had been my grandfather's trusted advisor and had known me since childhood. If anyone could help me understand my options regarding the family business, it would be her. "Rachel, dear." Rosa's warm voice came through the phone with immediate concern. "I heard from security that you were at the park yesterday but didn't visit the offices. Is everything all right?" "Rosa, I need to ask you something confidential," I said, settling onto a bench overlooking a small pond where ducks glided peacefully across the water. If I wanted to become more involved in the day-to-day operations of Horizon Entertainment, what would that process look like? There was a pause, and I could almost hear Rosa's mind working through the implications of my question. "Rachel, you know you have every right to take active control of the company whenever you choose. The trust arrangement was designed to protect your interests until you were ready to step into a leadership role, not to keep you permanently removed from operations." "I know that intellectually," I replied, "but I've been so focused on my personal life for the past few years that I've lost touch with what's actually happening in the business. Would it be possible for me to spend some time shadowing different departments, learning about current operations and challenges?" Rosa's enthusiasm was immediately apparent. "Of course, dear. In fact, I think it's exactly what your grandfather would have wanted. He always said the business would be strongest when it had a Hayes actively involved in leadership. How soon would you like to start?" The possibility of reconnecting with my family's legacy felt like coming home to a part of myself I had forgotten existed. "Could we start next week? I need to arrange some things in my personal life first, but I'm ready to begin learning everything I need to know about running the company." After ending the call with Rosa, I sat by the pond for another hour, watching the ducks and feeling pieces of a plan beginning to form in my mind. Marcus had shown me clearly that he viewed me as disposable, someone whose feelings and needs could be sacrificed whenever his priorities demanded it. But he had no idea who he was actually dealing with, no understanding of the resources and options available to me. The woman he had abandoned at the theme park was someone he thought he knew and could control. The woman who was emerging from that experience was someone entirely different, someone connected to her own power and unwilling to accept disrespect or emotional neglect. The transformation wasn't about revenge, though there would certainly be consequences for his behavior. It was about remembering who I was beneath the diminished version of myself I had been living as. That evening, Marcus called while Lauren and I were preparing dinner together in her kitchen. I let it ring through to voicemail, not yet ready to engage with him while my thoughts were still forming. When I listened to his message later, his tone was irritated rather than apologetic. "Rachel, you've made your point about being upset. I think you've had enough time to cool off now. I expect you home tonight so we can put this whole thing behind us and move on. I've got an early meeting tomorrow, and I need my good shirt ironed." The casual assumption that I would return on his timeline, coupled with his immediate focus on his own needs rather than addressing the issues between us, confirmed everything I had been realizing about our marriage. Marcus saw me as a service provider rather than an equal partner, someone whose primary value lay in managing the domestic aspects of his life. I deleted the message without calling him back. The next morning, I contacted my personal attorney, Patricia O'Brien, who had handled my legal affairs since my grandfather's death. Pat had been urging me for years to take a more active role in my inheritance, arguing that passive management wasn't serving my best interests or those of the company. "I want to schedule a meeting to discuss my options regarding Horizon Entertainment," I told her over the phone, both in terms of assuming active leadership and in terms of protecting my interests if my personal circumstances change significantly. Pat's voice sharpened with interest. "Are we talking about divorce proceedings, Rachel? Because if so, there are several steps we should take immediately to ensure your assets are properly protected. I don't know yet, I answered honestly. But I want to be prepared for any eventuality. Can we meet this week to go over everything? Of course. But Rachel, if there's any possibility your marriage is ending, you need to understand that your husband could potentially claim significant community property rights depending on how your assets are structured. We should review your prenuptial agreement and discuss additional protective measures. The conversation with Pat made me realize how naive I had been about the financial implications of my marriage. I had been so focused on emotional and relationship dynamics that I hadn't considered how Marcus might respond if he discovered the true extent of my wealth and inheritance. A man willing to abandon his wife at a theme park might be capable of much worse behavior when significant money was involved. Over the next few days, I divided my time between researching my options and avoiding Marcus's increasingly frequent and irritated phone calls. Each voicemail revealed more about his true character, progressing from mild annoyance to genuine anger that I wasn't responding to his demands to come home immediately. "This is ridiculous, Rachel," he said in one message. "You're acting like a spoiled child having a tantrum. I don't have time for these games. I need you home to handle things here. And I need you to stop embarrassing me by staying at your sister's like we're having some kind of marriage crisis." The fact that he was more concerned about embarrassment than about repairing our relationship told me everything I needed to know about his priorities. Marcus was upset because my absence was inconveniencing him, not because he missed me or regretted his behavior. By the end of the week, I had made several important decisions. I would return home, but not to resume our previous dynamic. Instead, I would begin the process of reclaiming my identity and my power, starting with becoming actively involved in Horizon Entertainment. Marcus could choose to support my growth and change, or he could reveal more of his true character through opposition. Either way, I would finally know exactly who I was married to and could make decisions accordingly. The woman who returned home would not be the same person who had left. She would be someone connected to her own strength, her own resources, and her own worth. And if Marcus couldn't handle that transformation, then he would discover just how much he had underestimated the woman he thought he could treat as disposable. The game was changing, and I was finally ready to play by my own rules instead of his. Monday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that often follows difficult decisions. I stood in Lauren's kitchen, dressed in a navy business suit I hadn't worn in over 2 years, preparing for my first meeting with the Horizon Entertainment executive team. The woman looking back at me from the hallway mirror bore little resemblance to the abandoned wife who had sought refuge here just 1 week ago. Rosa Martinez met me in the executive parking garage of the Horizon Entertainment headquarters in Los Angeles, her familiar smile providing warmth in what could have been an intimidating environment. The building rose 37 floors above. Downtown, its glass facade reflecting the morning sun while the lobby bustled with employees beginning their workday. "Your grandfather would be so proud to see you here," Rosa said as we rode the elevator to the top floor. "He always believed you would find your way back to the company when the time was right. I think he would have appreciated the circumstances too. William Hayes never tolerated anyone who didn't treat people with respect." The executive conference room commanded a spectacular view of the Los Angeles skyline, with photographs of all 7 Horizon Entertainment properties lining the walls. Sunset Gardens held the place of honor directly behind the head of the table, its iconic castle spires captured during the golden hour of sunset that had inspired the park's name. "Before we begin with the operational briefings," Rosa said, settling into the chair beside me, "I need to share some information that directly affects you and your family's interests. We've been monitoring some concerning activities related to your husband's employment situation." My attention sharpened immediately. "What kind of activities?" Tony Rodriguez, the company's head of security and investigations, opened a thick file folder and spread several documents across the polished table. "Mrs. Hayes, We routinely conduct background checks on individuals who have close relationships with board members and major shareholders. In your husband's case, some irregularities have come to light that we felt you should be aware of. The first document Tony presented was a credit report that made my stomach clench with recognition and dread. Marcus had accumulated over $200,000 in personal debt across multiple credit cards, many of which had been opened using our shared address and his representation of our combined financial status. More troubling were the patterns of spending revealed in the detailed statements. These charges, Tony pointed to highlighted entries spanning the past 18 months, show consistent payments to online gaming platforms, sports betting sites, and several casinos in Nevada. The amounts and frequency suggest a significant gambling problem that he's been concealing from you. I studied the evidence with growing disbelief and anger. Dinners at expensive restaurants on nights when Marcus claimed to be working late at the office. Hotel charges in Las Vegas during weekends when he told me he was attending marketing conferences. Cash advances that coincided with his mysterious mood swings and increased criticism of my spending on household necessities. There's more, Tony continued, producing another set of documents. Your husband has been making inquiries about your family's financial status with several people in your social circle. He's asked specific questions about inheritance laws, community property rights, and the estimated value of Horizon Entertainment. Rosa leaned forward, her expression serious. Rachel, we have evidence that Marcus has been researching ways to gain access to or control over your trust fund. He's contacted 3 different attorneys about challenging the structure of your inheritance, claiming you lack the mental capacity to manage such significant assets. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. While I had been struggling to understand his emotional distance and selfish behavior, Marcus had been systematically investigating ways to steal my inheritance. The man I had trusted with my heart and my home had been plotting to separate me from my family's legacy. How long has this been going on? I asked, my voice surprisingly steady despite the turmoil I felt inside. The earliest evidence we have dates back almost 2 years, Tony replied. It appears to have intensified significantly after your grandfather's death, when the full extent of your inheritance became a matter of public record through the probate process. I thought back to that difficult period, remembering how supportive Marcus had seemed during my grief. He had encouraged me to take time away from any business responsibilities, insisting that I shouldn't burden myself with complicated financial matters while I was mourning. At the time, his concern had seemed loving and protective. Now I understood it as manipulation designed to keep me ignorant of my own assets while he researched ways to access them. There's something else you need to know, Rosa said gently. Marcus has approached several of our mid-level managers over the past 6 months, presenting himself as your representative and requesting detailed financial information about the company's performance and future projections. When our employees referred him to the proper channels, he became aggressive and implied that their jobs might be at risk if they didn't cooperate. The picture that emerged from the evidence was devastating in its calculated cruelty. Marcus hadn't just been neglecting our marriage or taking me for granted. He had been actively working to undermine my connection to my own family's business, while positioning himself to benefit from my inheritance. The abandonment at the theme park wasn't an isolated incident of thoughtlessness. It was part of a larger pattern of viewing me as an obstacle between him and the wealth he believed he deserved. What are my options? I asked, fighting to keep my emotions under control while making critical decisions about my future. Pat O'Brien, my attorney, pulled out a legal pad covered with handwritten notes. First, we need to secure your assets immediately. The trust structure provides some protection, but we should establish additional safeguards given what we now know about Marcus's intentions. Second, we need to document everything we've discovered in case you decide to pursue divorce proceedings. And third, we should consider whether his actions constitute fraud or attempted fraud under California law. The thought of divorce, which had seemed so dramatic and overwhelming just days earlier, now felt like an obvious necessity. I couldn't remain married to someone who viewed me as a target rather than a partner, someone who had spent years lying to me while plotting to steal my inheritance. "I want to file for divorce," I said, the words coming out with surprising firmness. "But I don't want Marcus to know immediately. Can we prepare everything quietly while I figure out how to handle the personal aspects of this situation?" Pat nodded approvingly. "Absolutely. In fact, given the evidence of financial deception and possible fraud, a delayed filing might work in your favor. We can use the time to secure your assets and gather additional evidence of his misconduct." Over the next several hours, the team walked me through the current operations of all 7 Horizon Entertainment properties. The company was thriving under the management structure my grandfather had established, with consistent growth in revenue and guest satisfaction across all locations. However, there were expansion opportunities and strategic decisions that required input from the primary stakeholder. "We've been operating conservatively for the past 5 years," explained Janet Morrison, the chief financial officer. "While that's provided stability, we've also passed up several acquisition opportunities that could have significantly increased our market share and geographic reach. The board has been waiting for direction from the Hayes family about our long-term growth strategy." Learning about missed opportunities and delayed decisions because of my absence from company leadership made me realize how my personal desire for a normal marriage had potentially cost the business millions in revenue and growth. My grandfather had built Horizon Entertainment to be a legacy that would benefit families for generations, but my withdrawal from involvement had left the company without clear direction for its future. "I want to schedule meetings with department heads over the next 2 weeks," I decided. "I need to understand every aspect of our operations before I can make informed decisions about expansion and strategic direction. And I want to begin attending all board meetings immediately." Rose's smile was radiant. "Your grandfather always said you had the best business instincts in the family. He would be thrilled to see you taking control of your inheritance." That afternoon, while driving back to Lauren's house through the sprawling suburbs between Los Angeles and Sacramento, I called my sister from the car to update her on the day's revelations. Lauren listened in stunned silence as I described the evidence of Marcus's gambling addiction, his investigation into my finances, and his attempts to manipulate company employees. "Rachel, this is terrifying," Lauren said when I finished recounting the discoveries. "He's been living a completely double life while making you feel guilty for having any concerns about your marriage. You could have been in real danger if he had found a way to access your trust fund." The realization that I might have been physically at risk hadn't fully occurred to me until Lauren voiced it. A man desperate enough to accumulate hundreds of thousands in gambling debt while secretly plotting to steal his wife's inheritance might be capable of much worse if his plans were threatened. "I'm not going back to the house alone," I decided. "When I do go back, I want Tony or another security professional with me. And I want surveillance installed to monitor Marcus's activities while we prepare the divorce proceedings." "Good," Lauren said firmly. "I was going to insist on that anyway. This man isn't who you thought you married, Rachel. You need to protect yourself like you're dealing with a potentially dangerous stranger, because that's essentially what he is." That evening, I sat in Lauren's garden as the sun set behind the neighboring houses, processing the emotional impact of everything I had learned. The grief I felt wasn't just about the end of my marriage. It was about mourning the person I had thought Marcus was, the relationship I had believed we shared, and the years I had wasted trying to build a life with someone who viewed me as a mark in a long-term con game. But beneath the grief, something else was growing. A cold, clear anger that felt entirely different from the hurt and confusion I had experienced after being abandoned at the theme park. This anger was focused and purposeful, driven by the understanding that Marcus had deliberately deceived me while I had offered him nothing but honesty and support. Marcus had been calling and texting constantly since I had left for Los Angeles. That morning, his messages growing increasingly demanding and manipulative. When I finally listened to his voicemails, the pattern Rosa and Tony had described became immediately apparent. "Rachel, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but it needs to stop," he said in one message. "I've been patient with your little tantrum about the theme park, but now you're being ridiculous. I need you home tonight to discuss some important financial matters that affect both of us." In another message, his tone shifted to false concern. "Honey, I'm worried about you. This behavior isn't like you at all. Maybe you should consider talking to someone about the stress you've been under since your grandfather died. I've been researching some excellent therapists who specialize in grief counseling and emotional instability." The manipulation was so blatant that I wondered how I had missed it for so long. Marcus was attempting to gaslight me into believing that my reasonable response to his betrayal was evidence of mental illness, while simultaneously demanding access to discussions about financial matters that undoubtedly related to his schemes to access my inheritance. I didn't respond to any of his communications. Instead, I spent the evening with Tony Rodriguez on a secure phone line, planning the logistics of safely retrieving my belongings from the house I had shared with Marcus, while ensuring my personal safety and the security of sensitive documents. "We'll arrange for a moving team and security escort for tomorrow afternoon," Tony explained. "I recommend taking everything you value or need, because once Marcus realizes what's happening, his behavior could become unpredictable. Men with significant gambling debts and failing schemes often become desperate." The next morning, Pat called with an update on the legal preparations. "We've filed a motion to freeze all joint accounts and credit cards pending the divorce proceedings," she reported. "We've also obtained a restraining order that prevents Marcus from making any claims against your trust fund or attempting to represent himself as your financial representative." "How will he find out about these actions?" I asked. "He'll be served with papers this afternoon, right around the time you're collecting your belongings from the house. The timing is intentional. We want him to understand the seriousness of his situation while you're safely protected by security personnel." The drive to my former home felt surreal, like returning to a movie set where I had once played a role I no longer recognized. The house looked exactly the same from the outside, with its manicured lawn and decorative landscaping, but it no longer felt like a place where I belonged. Tony followed behind me in a separate vehicle, while a discreet moving truck waited around the corner. Marcus's car was in the driveway, which meant he was home despite claiming to have important work meetings all week. I wondered how much of his supposed career success was as fictional as his pretense of being a loving husband. The front door opened before I could use my key, revealing Marcus with an expression of relief that quickly shifted to confusion when he saw the security escort behind me. "Rachel, thank God you're home. I was starting to think something terrible had happened to you. Who are these people?" "Professional movers," I replied calmly, walking past him into the foyer. "I'm here to collect my belongings. We need to talk about our marriage, Marcus, but first I need to secure my personal property." His face went through several rapid transformations as he processed what was happening. "Your belongings? Rachel, what are you talking about? This is our house. Everything here belongs to both of us. You can't just show up with strangers and start taking things." Tony stepped forward, his presence immediately commanding respect. "Mr. Hayes, your wife has every legal right to remove her personal property from this residence. We're here to ensure the process goes smoothly and safely for everyone involved." "Safely?" Marcus's voice rose with indignation and what might have been fear. "Are you implying that I would hurt my own wife? This is insane. Rachel, what have you told these people about me?" I met his eyes directly, seeing him clearly for the first time in our entire relationship. "I've told them the truth, Marcus. About your gambling debts, your investigation into my family's finances, and your attempts to manipulate Horizon Entertainment employees. I know everything." The color drained from his face as he realized the extent of what had been discovered. For a moment, he seemed to consider denying everything. Then his expression hardened into something I had never seen before. "You had me investigated? You went behind my back and invaded my privacy?" Your privacy? I couldn't help laughing at the audacity of his indignation. Marcus, you've been lying to me about virtually every aspect of your life for years. You've accumulated massive debts while claiming to be financially responsible. You've been gambling while criticizing my spending on groceries. You've been plotting to steal my inheritance while pretending to love me. The movers worked efficiently around us, packing boxes of books, artwork, and personal items that I had brought to the marriage or purchased independently. Marcus watched with growing agitation as pieces of our shared life disappeared into cardboard containers. "Rachel, please," he said, his tone shifting to the manipulative concern I now recognized as another tool in his arsenal of deception. "I know I've made some mistakes, but we can work through this. Marriage is about forgiveness and compromise. Don't let outside influences destroy what we've built together." "What we've built together," I repeated. "Marcus, I built this life. I furnished this house, I maintained our social relationships, I supported your career while you actively worked to undermine mine. You've contributed nothing but lies and manipulation." The doorbell rang, interrupting our confrontation. Tony moved to answer it, returning with a process server who handed Marcus an official envelope. "Marcus Hayes, you're being served with divorce papers and related legal documents." Marcus tore open the envelope, his eyes scanning the papers with increasing panic. "A restraining order? You're claiming I'm a threat to your financial security?" "Rachel, this is vindictive and completely unnecessary. I would never hurt you." "You already have hurt me," I replied. "You've spent years lying to me, stealing from our joint accounts to fund your gambling, and plotting to access my inheritance through fraud. The restraining order isn't vindictive, Marcus. It's protective." As the last of my belongings were loaded into the moving truck, I took one final walk through the house that had been my home for 4 years. Each room held memories that felt like they belonged to someone else, a naive woman who had believed in a love that was never real. Marcus followed me through the house, alternating between anger and desperate pleading. "Rachel, you're making a huge mistake. You think your family's money makes you better than everyone else, but you're just a spoiled rich girl who doesn't understand how the real world works. You'll never find anyone who loves you the way I do." I turned to face him one last time, feeling nothing but pity for the small, desperate man who had tried to steal my life while claiming to love me. "Marcus, you never loved me. You loved the idea of my money, but you made one critical error in your planning." "What's that?" he asked, his voice bitter with defeat. "You never bothered to find out how much money you were really trying to steal." With that, I walked out of the house and into the rest of my life, leaving Marcus to discover that the woman he had abandoned at a theme park owned the entire entertainment empire he had never bothered to learn about. 2 months had passed since I walked out of the house I had shared with Marcus, and the transformation in my life felt nothing short of miraculous. I stood in my new corner office on the 37th floor of Horizon Entertainment headquarters, reviewing the quarterly reports that showed record-breaking profits across all 7 properties. The woman who had been abandoned at a theme park had become the active CEO of a multi-billion-dollar entertainment empire. The irony wasn't lost on me that Marcus had thrown away his chance at the very fortune he had been so desperately scheming to obtain. While he had been researching ways to manipulate me into giving him access to my inheritance, he could have simply supported my involvement in the family business and benefited legitimately from our partnership. His greed and deception had cost him everything he thought he wanted. Pat O'Brien knocked on my office door, carrying a thick folder that I recognized as the final divorce settlement documents. "Everything is ready for your signature, Rachel." Marcus's attorney finally convinced him to accept our terms rather than face criminal fraud charges. I settled into my leather chair, noting how natural it felt to be making decisions that affected thousands of employees and millions of guests across our properties. What did he ultimately agree to? Complete relinquishment of any claims to your assets, both current and future, Pat replied, spreading the papers across my desk. He walks away with exactly what he brought to the marriage, which, as we documented, was approximately $17,000 in personal savings and a significant amount of debt. The settlement also included provisions that Marcus could never again use my name or our former relationship to gain access to Horizon Entertainment properties or attempt to conduct business with our vendors and partners. Tony Rodriguez had recommended these restrictions after discovering that Marcus had been trying to leverage his connection to me for personal gain even before our marriage ended. "Has he found employment?" I asked, more out of curiosity than concern. Despite everything Marcus had done, I took no pleasure in the idea of him facing genuine hardship. "He's working at a small marketing firm in Phoenix," Pat reported. "Much reduced circumstances compared to his previous position, but honest work. His gambling debts are being managed through a court-supervised payment plan. The change of scenery seems to have been beneficial for breaking his destructive patterns." I signed each document carefully, officially ending the marriage that had been built on lies and manipulation. With each signature, I felt lighter, as if I were finally stepping fully into the life I was meant to live, rather than the diminished version I had accepted for so long. The afternoon brought a meeting with the architectural team designing our 8th property, a revolutionary entertainment complex that would combine traditional theme park attractions with cutting-edge virtual reality experiences. The project represented the kind of innovation my grandfather had always encouraged, pushing the boundaries of what families could experience together. The preliminary designs incorporate sustainable energy systems throughout the entire complex, explained Sarah Chen, our lead architect. Solar panels integrated into attraction facades, geothermal cooling systems, and water recycling technology that will make this our most environmentally responsible property. I studied the renderings spread across the conference table, seeing not just buildings and attractions, but the culmination of my grandfather's vision for entertainment that brought families together while respecting the natural world. "What's our timeline for breaking ground?" "If we receive final approval from the board next month, construction could begin in January," Sarah replied. "The location in Colorado will allow for year-round operations with seasonal attractions that take advantage of both summer and winter weather." The scale and complexity of the project would have intimidated me just months earlier, but my intensive education in all aspects of Horizon Entertainment's operations had given me confidence in making decisions that affected hundreds of millions of dollars in investment. I was no longer the hesitant heiress who deferred to others. I had become the leader my grandfather had always believed I could be. After the meeting, I walked through the executive floor, stopping to chat with employees who had known me since childhood, but were still adjusting to seeing me in a leadership role. The transition hadn't always been smooth, but the respect I had earned through hard work and genuine care for the company's mission had overcome any initial skepticism about my qualifications. Rosa Martinez found me in the employee break room, sharing coffee and conversation with maintenance supervisors who were describing improvements they wanted to implement at Sunset Gardens. These informal discussions had become some of my favorite parts of the job, connecting directly with the people who made magic happen for millions of families every year. "Rachel, there's something I need to discuss with you privately," Rosa said, her tone suggesting news that required careful handling. We returned to my office, where Rosa closed the door and settled into the chair across from my desk with uncharacteristic seriousness. "We've received some information that Marcus has been attempting to contact several entertainment industry publications with what he claims is an exclusive story about his marriage to the Horizon Entertainment heiress." My stomach clenched with familiar anxiety. Even divorced and legally separated from my assets, Marcus was still trying to find ways to exploit our former relationship for personal gain. What kind of story is he trying to sell? According to our media contacts, he's positioning himself as the victim of a vindictive ex-wife who used her family's wealth and power to destroy his career and reputation, Rosa explained. He's claiming that you manipulated him into marriage, then discarded him when he became inconvenient. The audacity of his narrative would have been laughable if it weren't potentially damaging to both my personal reputation and the company's image. Marcus was attempting to rewrite history, casting himself as the wronged party while completely ignoring his gambling addiction, financial deception, and attempted fraud. Have any publications shown interest in his story? I asked, already formulating a response strategy. One tabloid has expressed preliminary interest, but their fact-checking department contacted us for verification of his claims, Rosa replied. When we provided documentation of his actual behavior during the marriage, including the evidence of fraud and gambling debts, they decided not to pursue the story. I felt a surge of gratitude for the thorough documentation Tony Rodriguez had insisted on gathering during our investigation of Marcus's activities. The evidence protected not just my legal interests, but also my reputation against his attempts at character assassination. I want to be proactive about this, I decided. If Marcus is shopping this story around, other publications might be tempted by the drama without doing proper research. Let's prepare a comprehensive media packet that tells the real story, with documentation, for any journalist who might be approached. Rosa nodded approvingly. Your grandfather always said that truth was the best defense against lies. He would have handled this situation exactly the same way. That evening, I drove back to my new home in Marin County, a restored Victorian mansion that had belonged to my family for 3 generations. Unlike the sterile suburban house I had shared with Marcus, this property felt alive with history and connection to my roots. Every room held memories of holidays and celebrations with my grandfather, conversations about business and life that had shaped my understanding of responsibility and leadership. The house sat on 12 acres of gardens and orchards, providing privacy and space for the quiet reflection that had become essential to my daily routine. I had converted the library into a home office where I could work on Horizon Entertainment business, while surrounded by the books and artwork that represented my family's legacy. Lauren called while I was preparing dinner in the kitchen that still held our grandmother's copper pots and cast iron skillets. How was your day ruling the entertainment empire? She asked with the gentle teasing that had characterized our relationship since childhood. Challenging and rewarding, I replied, stirring the pasta sauce that had been our grandfather's favorite recipe. Marcus is apparently trying to sell his version of our marriage to gossip magazines, but so far no one is buying his victim narrative. Good, Lauren said firmly. That man burned through every ounce of sympathy I might have had for him when we discovered what he was really doing during your marriage. Speaking of which, have you thought about dating yet? It's been 2 months since the divorce was finalized. The question made me pause, wooden spoon suspended over the simmering sauce. The idea of romantic relationships felt both foreign and potentially appealing, but my focus had been so completely absorbed by reclaiming my identity and building my role at Horizon Entertainment that I hadn't considered whether I was ready for that kind of vulnerability again. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me feels like I need more time to fully understand who I am outside of that marriage before I can consider sharing my life with someone else. But another part of me wonders if I'm just making excuses because I'm scared of being deceived again. There's no timeline for healing, Lauren said gently. You'll know when you're ready, but don't let Marcus's betrayal make you think all men are like him. There are good people in the world who would appreciate and respect the amazing woman you've become. After ending the call with Lauren, I walked through the gardens as the sun set behind the hills that surrounded my property. The peaceful evening provided perspective on how dramatically my life had changed since that devastating day at Sunset Gardens, when Marcus abandoned me among the attractions that belonged to my family. The woman who had been left stranded at the theme park had believed her worth was tied to her ability to make an unworthy man happy. The woman walking through these gardens owned one of the most successful entertainment companies in the world and was building a legacy that would benefit families for generations. The transformation hadn't just been about reclaiming my inheritance, it had been about reclaiming myself. The next morning brought a board meeting where we would vote on the Colorado expansion project and several other strategic initiatives I had proposed during my months of intensive involvement in company operations. As I prepared my presentation materials, I reflected on how natural this role had become and how much I enjoyed the challenge of balancing creative vision with financial responsibility. The boardroom filled with men and women who had known me since childhood but were still adjusting to my transformation from passive heiress to active leader. Some had initially questioned whether I had the business acumen to justify my controlling interest in the company, but the results spoke for themselves. Under my leadership, Horizon Entertainment was experiencing its most profitable and innovative period in decades. The Colorado project represents more than just geographic expansion, I explained to the assembled board members. It's an opportunity to establish Horizon Entertainment as the industry leader in sustainable entertainment technology, while creating a destination that will attract families from across the country. The presentation included detailed financial projections, environmental, impact studies, and market research that demonstrated the project's potential for both profit and positive social impact. I had learned to speak the language of business with the same fluency my grandfather had possessed, combining emotional understanding of what families wanted with practical knowledge of what investors required. The initial investment is significant, acknowledged Robert Sterling, our chief financial officer, but the long-term projections show extraordinary potential for return on investment and market expansion. The vote was unanimous in favor of proceeding with the Colorado project, along with 2 smaller expansions that would bring Horizon Entertainment properties to markets we had never served before. As I shook hands with board members after the meeting, I felt the satisfaction of seeing my vision translated into concrete plans that would affect millions of lives. Later that afternoon, Tony Rodriguez requested a private meeting to discuss security concerns that had emerged from his ongoing monitoring of Marcus's activities. We met in the secure conference room that was swept weekly for surveillance devices and lined with technology that prevented electronic eavesdropping. Marcus has been in contact with several of your former social acquaintances, Tony reported, asking specific questions about your daily routines, your new living situation, and your involvement with Horizon Entertainment. The pattern suggests he might be planning some kind of approach or confrontation. The news didn't surprise me, but it did concern me. A man desperate enough to try selling fabricated stories to tabloid magazines might be capable of more direct attempts to insert himself back into my life or extract money from me through manipulation or intimidation. What kind of security measures do you recommend? I asked, already mentally preparing for the possibility that Marcus might escalate his attempts to benefit from our former relationship. Enhanced surveillance at your residence and office, a security escort for public appearances, and immediate notification if he attempts to contact you directly or indirectly, Tony replied. We should also consider alerting local law enforcement about the potential for harassment or stalking behavior. The idea that I needed protection from the man I had once shared a bed with felt surreal, but I had learned to trust Tony's professional judgment about potential threats. Marcus had already demonstrated his willingness to lie, steal, and manipulate for financial gain. It wasn't unreasonable to assume he might try more aggressive tactics if his current schemes failed to produce results. Implement whatever security measures you think are necessary, I decided. But I don't want to live in fear or change my routine significantly. Marcus has already taken enough of my time and energy. I won't let him dictate how I live my life. Now, as the sun set over Los Angeles, I stood in my office looking out at the city where my grandfather had built his entertainment empire from nothing but vision and determination. The challenges ahead felt manageable compared to what I had already overcome. Marcus could try to sell lies about our marriage. He could attempt to intimidate or manipulate me, but he could never again touch the life I was building for myself. The woman he had abandoned at the theme park was gone forever, replaced by someone who understood her own power and refused to accept less than she deserved. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities, but I would face them as the leader of Horizon Entertainment, the granddaughter of William Hayes, and most importantly, as someone who had learned to value herself appropriately. The final confrontation with Marcus was coming. I could feel it approaching like a storm on the horizon, but I was ready for whatever he might try, protected by legal safeguards, security professionals, and most importantly, by the unshakable knowledge of who I really was and what I was capable of achieving. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing architectural plans for the Colorado expansion in my office overlooking downtown Los Angeles. Tony Rodriguez's voice carried an urgency that immediately commanded my attention, cutting through the usual morning routine of executive meetings and strategic planning sessions. "Rachel, Marcus is at Sunset Gardens," Tony reported. "He showed up about an hour ago claiming to be conducting business research for a potential client. Security recognized him from the photos we distributed, but he's not technically trespassing since the park is open to the public." I set down my coffee and moved to the window, looking out at the sprawling city where my family's entertainment empire had grown from my grandfather's single vision into a multi-billion-dollar legacy. The irony of Marcus returning to the scene of his original betrayal wasn't lost on me, but I felt only calm determination rather than the anxiety such news might have provoked months earlier. "What's he doing there?" I asked, already reaching for my car keys, while Tony provided details about Marcus's movements through the park. "He's been asking employees questions about management structure and ownership, claiming he's writing an article about family-owned businesses in the entertainment industry," Tony explained. "Several staff members have reported feeling uncomfortable with his questions, especially when he started asking about your personal involvement in daily operations." The audacity of Marcus attempting to gather intelligence about my role at Horizon Entertainment while posing as a journalist revealed the desperation underlying his recent schemes. After months of failed attempts to profit from our former marriage through tabloid stories and social media manipulation, he had apparently decided on a more direct approach. "I'm driving down there now," I decided, pulling on the navy blazer. That had become my standard uniform for handling company business. "Arrange for additional security at the park, but keep them discreet. I want to handle this personally." The drive from Los Angeles to Sunset Gardens took 90 minutes through traffic that seemed unusually heavy for a Tuesday morning. As I navigated the familiar route, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me from abandoned wife to CEO of one of America's most successful entertainment companies. The transformation felt both surreal and inevitable, as if I had finally grown into the person I was always meant to become. Sunset Gardens appeared before me in all its magnificent glory, the entrance gates gleaming in the afternoon sun, while families streamed in and out of the park that had been my second home throughout childhood. The sight of the castle spires, rising against the California sky, filled me with the same sense of wonder and responsibility I had felt during countless visits with my grandfather. I parked in the executive lot and made my way through the employee entrance, exchanging greetings with staff members who had watched me grow from William Hayes's curious granddaughter into the company's active leader. Their warmth and respect felt like armor against whatever manipulation Marcus might attempt during our inevitable confrontation. Miguel Santos, the head of park operations, met me near the employee break room with an expression of protective concern that reminded me how much loyalty my family had earned through decades of treating workers with dignity and respect. "Mrs. Hayes, your ex-husband is currently in the Enchanted Castle area," Miguel reported. "He's been approaching cast members during their breaks, asking about employee satisfaction and management policies." Some of the younger staff members seemed intimidated by his questions. The protective instinct I felt toward Horizon Entertainment employees surprised me with its intensity. These people weren't just workers in my company. They were guardians of the magic that brought joy to millions of families every year. And Marcus's intrusion into their workplace felt like a violation of something sacred. Where exactly is he now? I asked, checking my watch and calculating how long Marcus had been gathering whatever information he thought might be useful for his latest scheme. Last seen near the carousel, talking to Janet from guest services. Miguel replied, Security is maintaining visual contact without intervening per your instructions. I made my way through the park along pathways I had walked thousands of times, past attractions that held memories spanning 3 generations of my family's involvement in creating magical experiences for children and adults alike. The familiar sounds of laughter and excitement provided a soundtrack to what would hopefully be the final chapter in the saga of my failed marriage. The carousel occupied a central location in the park's classic family area, its hand-painted horses rising and falling to the accompaniment of traditional circus music, while delighted children waved to parents taking photographs from the surrounding benches. Marcus stood near the operator's booth, notepad in hand, questioning Janet Morrison while she tried to maintain her professional smile despite obvious discomfort. I approached from behind, my footsteps silent on the well-maintained walkways, and positioned myself close enough to hear Marcus's questions without immediately revealing my presence. The conversation confirmed everything Tony had reported about: his fishing expedition for information about company operations and my personal involvement. So Rachel Hayes actually comes to the park regularly? Marcus was asking, his tone suggesting casual professional interest, while his body language revealed intense personal investment in Janet's answers. That must be unusual for someone in her position. Most wealthy inheritors delegate operational oversight to hired managers. Janet's discomfort was visible in her rigid posture and the way her eyes kept scanning the area, probably hoping for rescue from what felt like an interrogation, disguised as journalism. Mrs. Hayes is very hands-on with all aspects of our operations, she replied carefully. She believes in understanding every department to make informed leadership decisions. And she's here often enough that employees feel comfortable approaching her directly? Marcus pressed, making notes that I suspected had nothing to do with any legitimate article. That level of accessibility seems like it would be time-consuming for someone managing a multi-billion-dollar company. The calculation in his voice made my skin crawl with recognition of the manipulative techniques I had endured throughout our marriage. Marcus was gathering intelligence about my schedule and accessibility, information that could only be intended for some scheme to insert himself back into my life or extract money through intimidation. "Excuse me," I said, stepping forward with the calm authority that had become second nature during my months of active leadership. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Rachel Hayes, CEO of Horizon Entertainment Group." Marcus spun around, his face cycling through surprise, fear, and desperate calculation before settling into the false charm I remembered so well from our marriage. "Rachel? What a wonderful coincidence. I was just conducting some research for an article about successful family businesses in the entertainment industry." Janet seized the opportunity to escape, excusing herself with obvious relief while I faced the man who had once shared my bed, and my trust, now reduced to a transparent con artist attempting to exploit the very company he had tried to defraud through our marriage. "An article for which publication?" I asked, maintaining professional courtesy while Tony Rodriguez and 2 security officers positioned themselves discreetly nearby. "I'd be happy to arrange a proper interview through our media relations department if you're writing legitimate journalism." Marcus's confidence faltered slightly as he recognized the challenge in my question. "It's a freelance piece I'm developing for several potential outlets," he replied, his explanation vague enough to be meaningless. I thought it would be interesting to explore how inherited wealth affects business leadership in family-owned companies. The subtext of his supposed article topic wasn't subtle. Marcus was still operating under the assumption that I was an unqualified heiress coasting on inherited privilege, someone who could be manipulated or intimidated by a man with superior business experience and understanding. "How fascinating," I replied, allowing a small smile to play at the corners of my mouth. "I'd love to hear your theories about inherited wealth and business leadership. Perhaps we could discuss them somewhere more private?" I gestured toward the employee entrance that led to the executive offices, curious to see how far Marcus would push his charade when confronted directly by the woman he had so badly underestimated. The walk through the administrative areas of Sunset Gardens provided an opportunity for Marcus to see the scope and sophistication of the operation he had never bothered to learn about during our marriage. Employees nodded respectfully as we passed, their recognition of my authority visible in their posture and greetings. My office in the Sunset Gardens Executive Building commanded a view of the entire park, from the soaring peaks of the roller coasters to the gentle curves of the children's rides. Family photographs and business awards lined the walls, creating a visual timeline of Horizon Entertainment's growth under 3 generations of Hayes family leadership. "Please, have a seat," I offered, settling behind the mahogany desk that had belonged to my grandfather while Marcus took in the evidence of real power and success that surrounded him. "Now, what specific aspects of inherited wealth and business leadership did you want to explore for your article?" Marcus perched uncomfortably on the edge of his chair, his earlier confidence evaporating as he realized he was completely out of his depth in this environment. "I'm particularly interested in how family businesses maintain competitiveness when leadership positions are inherited rather than earned through traditional corporate advancement," he said, his question revealing both his ignorance and his contempt. "An excellent question," I replied, leaning back in my chair with the relaxed confidence that came from understanding my own competence and authority. "Tell me, Marcus, what research have you done about Horizon Entertainment's performance over the past several months?" The question caught him off guard, as I had intended. "I've reviewed some basic financial information available through public records," he replied carefully, probably realizing that he was walking into territory where his ignorance would be exposed. "Then you're aware that, under my leadership, Horizon Entertainment has achieved record-breaking profits, expanded into new markets, and launched innovative sustainability initiatives that have positioned us as industry leaders," I continued, watching his face as the implications of my words sank. Marcus's expression shifted from confusion to dawning realization as he began to understand that the woman he had dismissed as a pampered heiress had actually proven herself as a formidable business leader. "Your leadership?" he repeated, his voice betraying the first hint of genuine surprise. "Did you think I was just a figurehead, Marcus?" I asked, genuinely curious about the assumptions that had guided his behavior throughout our marriage and beyond. "Did you imagine that I inherited billions of dollars in assets without developing the skills necessary to manage them effectively?" The silence stretched between us as Marcus processed information that contradicted everything he thought he knew about me and my capabilities. His schemes had been based on the premise that I was an incompetent rich girl who could be manipulated or intimidated by a supposedly superior man. "I don't understand," he finally admitted, his facade of professional journalism crumbling completely. "When we were married, you never showed any interest in business. You seemed content to let me handle all the financial decisions and career planning." "I seemed content," I repeated, emphasizing the word that revealed how little attention he had paid to my actual feelings and desires during our marriage. "Marcus, I spent 4 years supporting your ambitions while you dismissed mine. I managed our household, our social obligations, and our financial responsibilities while you pursued your career and your gambling addiction." His face flushed with anger and embarrassment as I laid out the reality of our relationship dynamic with the clarity that distance and growth had provided. "That's not how it was," he protested. "I was building a future for both of us. Everything I did was for our partnership." "Everything you did was for yourself," I corrected firmly, "including the scheme to access my trust fund, the forged insurance policies, and the attempts to manipulate my family's employees for information about my inheritance." Marcus's remaining composure collapsed entirely as he realized the extent of what I knew about his deception and fraud. "Rachel, you have to understand. I was desperate. The gambling got out of control, and I thought if I could just access some of your family's money, I could fix everything, and we could have a real future together." We could have had a real future, I agreed. If you had been honest with me about your problems and treated me as an equal partner instead of a target for exploitation. But you chose deception and manipulation instead of trust and communication. The conversation that followed revealed the full scope of Marcus's delusions about our marriage and my capabilities. He had genuinely believed that I was an empty-headed heiress who would be grateful for his attention and guidance, someone who could be controlled and manipulated without consequence. Do you want to know the truly ironic part of this situation, Marcus? I asked as our confrontation neared its conclusion. If you had supported my involvement in Horizon Entertainment instead of trying to steal from it, you would have benefited far more than any scheme you devised could have provided. Marcus stared at me with growing comprehension of the magnitude of his miscalculation. What do you mean? I mean that as my husband, you would have shared in the success of a multi-billion-dollar company that has grown exponentially under my leadership, I explained. Instead of hundreds of thousands in gambling debts, you could have been part of building something meaningful and profitable. The weight of his lost opportunity settled over Marcus like a physical burden, his shoulders sagging as he contemplated what his greed and deception had cost him. It's not too late, he said desperately. We could try again. I've learned from my mistakes. Marcus, I said gently but firmly, you abandoned me at this very theme park because you thought a phone call was more important than our marriage. You spent years lying to me about every aspect of your life while plotting to steal my inheritance. There is no coming back from that level of betrayal. I stood and moved to the window overlooking the park where families were creating memories that would last lifetimes, where children were experiencing the magic my grandfather had envisioned when he built this place from nothing but dreams and determination. I want you to leave now, I continued, turning back to face the man who had tried so hard to diminish me. Security will escort you from the property, and you are permanently banned from all Horizon Entertainment locations. If you attempt to contact me again or interfere with my employees, criminal charges will be filed immediately. Marcus rose unsteadily from his chair, the reality of his complete defeat finally sinking in. Rachel, please, I know I made mistakes, but destroying my life won't make you feel better. I'm not destroying your life, Marcus, I replied with genuine calm. I'm protecting mine. You destroyed your own life through your choices and actions. I'm simply ensuring that your problems don't become my problems ever again. Security officers appeared in my office doorway, ready to escort Marcus from the premises with the professional courtesy that characterized all Horizon Entertainment operations. As he walked toward the door, Marcus turned back one final time. You'll regret this, he said, his voice carrying the bitter anger of a man who had gambled everything and lost. You think your money makes you untouchable, but everyone has vulnerabilities. You're right, I acknowledged. I do have vulnerabilities. I trusted you when I should have been more careful. I supported your dreams while neglecting my own. I made myself smaller to accommodate your ego. Those were my vulnerabilities, Marcus, and I've learned from them. After Marcus was removed from the property, I remained in my office for another hour, processing the finality of our confrontation and the sense of closure it had provided. The woman who had been abandoned at this park 6 months earlier no longer existed. In her place stood someone who understood her own worth and refused to accept less than she deserved. The sun was setting over Sunset Gardens as I made my way back through the park toward my car. Families were heading home after days filled with laughter and adventure, children carrying stuffed animals, and parents sharing the satisfied exhaustion that came from creating perfect memories. I paused near the carousel where Marcus had attempted, his pathetic intelligence gathering, watching the painted horses rise and fall while the circus music played its eternal song of joy and wonder. This place represented everything beautiful about human imagination and creativity. Everything Marcus had been too small and greedy to appreciate. My phone buzzed with a text from Lauren asking how the confrontation had gone. I replied with a simple message that captured the profound peace I felt. It's finally over. I'm free. Driving home through the California twilight, I reflected on the journey that had transformed me from victim to victor, from someone who accepted abandonment to someone who commanded respect and authority. Marcus had intended to exploit my supposed weaknesses, but instead, he had revealed my true strength. The woman who owned an entertainment empire would never again be stranded anywhere. She had the resources, the knowledge, and most importantly, the self-respect to ensure that her life was entirely her own. The face Marcus had made when he realized what he had thrown away was indeed perfect, but not for the reasons he might have expected. It was perfect because it represented the moment when justice was served and the truth was finally revealed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.